So far, been really impressed with the performance this card's putting out. We've got Miles Morales, 4K, very high settings, running absolutely amazing right now. Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at and testing out the all-new ASUS TUF RTX 4070. Now before we go any further, I do want to mention that this card was sent over by Newegg for review, and I want to give them a big shout out. Wouldn't have been able to get my hands on one of these without them. And if you're looking for any other PC parts, they got you covered over there. I'll leave links to their website in the description. Of course, the 4070 Ti is on the market, but personally, I kind of like the non-Ti variants because of the lower price tag. And I know saying lower price tag with these 40 series NVIDIA cards is a bit hard to do because, yeah, they are pretty pricey, but I was wanting to test this one out. I've actually tested out the 4060, the 4080, the 4090, and now we've got the 4070 here. And of course, this is the ASUS TUF Gaming version. We've got 12 gigabytes of GDDR6X RAM. And since we're working with a 40 series card, it does support DLSS 3. And one thing I saw in here that I actually really like is this GPU support bracket, or this kind of support post. Now, we've seen a lot of these with the larger cards nowadays. A lot of manufacturers do include these. What I like about this one is just the simplicity of it. I've seen some that were really complicated and I kind of just skipped them altogether because I didn't want to have to deal with it. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good looking card. They didn't go overboard with the RGB, which is something I really like. And if you want to build kind of a darker colored build, this would fit in perfectly for you. We've got a triple fan design, and this one is a 3.15 slot card. So we've got a pretty beefy heatsink on this, and the exoskeleton is vented on the rear. So it'll definitely give you some airflow there to keep this thing nice and chilly. But there's no doubt that it is a larger card like the other 40 series cards on the market. And they do recommend at least a 650 watt power supply. But one thing that I noticed here was we've only got one 8-pin connector, and luckily it's not a proprietary NVIDIA connector. It's a regular old 8-pin connector, so if you've already got a power supply that's 650 watts or better and a single PCIe 8-pin connector, then you can just use that power supply you have for the 4070. So basically what we have here is a 3.15 slot card, triple fan design. We've got 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM, a max clock in overclock mode up to 2580 megahertz, 5888 CUDA cores, 46 RT cores, and 184 tensor cores. So I'm going to be slapping this inside of one of my builds that I have set up already. This is actually pretty decent little setup, and I think it's going to pair up really nice with the RTX 4070. And like I mentioned, they did not go overboard with this RGB. We've got that TUF emblem right there on the side and kind of a little strip right underneath that. So nothing too major. Most of the RGB you're seeing is actually coming from my motherboard and the case itself. And I think it fits in here really nicely. And just having that single 8-pin is definitely a plus if you've already got a power supply that'll support this kind of wattage. And real quick, give you a rundown on my test rig. For the CPU, we've got an Intel i5 13600K, an NZXT Kraken X53 all-in-one cooler, an ASRock Z790 Taichi Carrera motherboard, 32 gigabytes of Kingston Fury DDR5 running at 6800 megahertz, 2 terabyte 4.0 NVMe SSD, Corsair 750 watt power supply. Of course, we've got the ASUS TUF GeForce RTX 4070, and it's all shoved inside of a Fantex P300A case. And for the operating system, we've got Windows 11 Pro fully updated, ready to go. Now, the very first thing I wanted to show off were some benchmarks that I ran on this unit. And the first one here is the OpenCL test inside of Geekbench 6. We got a 175,173. Next on the list, we've got 3D Mark Firestrike with an impressive 34,397. The 3D Mark DirectX Ray Tracing featured test netted us 51.19 FPS. And finally, we've got Time Spy with a really awesome 17,775. Now remember, I haven't manually overclocked this 4070. I've got it set up in overclock mode, just the switch on the side, so there is more that we can get out of this GPU. Now, I want to move over to some real-world gaming because that's what this thing's all about. And with most of this stuff, I wanted to go to 4K with no DLSS. So first up, we've got Spider-Man Miles Morales, 4K, very high, no DLSS. Looking great here, and of course, with that DLSS activated, or just taking it down to 1440, it's going to net us a lot more, but we got an average of 87 FPS. And it's really hard to come across from camera on screen to how good this actually looks at 4K maxed out, but this game looks absolutely amazing. I've got this on PS5 also, and I'll tell you, the PC version definitely blows it out of the water. Next up, we've got God of War, and going into this, I was sure we'd be able to run this with no DLSS over 60, but I did have to turn it on at 4K Ultra. So we've got DLSS set to quality right now, and we can get an average of around 78 FPS. I was pretty sure we could run this natively with no kind of resolution scale, but we were right there on the edge. We got an average of 62 FPS with DLSS disabled, so I could definitely see it dipping under in some circumstances. So taking that just to quality works out great, or again, 1440p is going to be good to go. The Last of Us Part 1, 1440p Ultra, no DLSS. I tried this at 4K and we were under 60, which was a little surprising, but again, this is one of the newer games. A lot of stuff going on here, and they still need a little more time to optimize this for PC. I'm not going to downplay the fact that the developers have already done a great job getting a lot of optimizations out, but I do think there's still more they can do with this one. Of course, we had to test out Cyberpunk 2077, where at 4K high with no DLSS, I got an average of 77 FPS, and with ray tracing on, you will need a lot of DLSS, and it already enables it when you go to ray tracing medium. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of ray tracing, giving, the power requirements and what you really need to do to run it at full speed, kind of maxed out with ray tracing on. But I'd rather just kind of run this at high or ultra settings, and at ultra, you will need to enable a little bit of DLSS. Going to quality will take us up to an average of around 75, or you could just run it at high like this with no resolution scale, because I still think it looks absolutely amazing. I also wanted to test out Horizon Zero Dawn, so I just used the built-in benchmark, where at 4K Ultra, no DLSS, this game does work really well in a lot of different GPU, CPU combos. And with this setup here, we got an average of 75 FPS, a high of 133, and a low of 59. So it did dip under 60, but that was few and far in between. And the final one I ran here is my favorite racing game right now. We've got Forza Horizon 5, 4K Extreme, so we're totally maxed out here at 4K with no DLSS, and we can get an average over 100 FPS. If you needed to run this at 120 or even 144, you could take the settings down to medium, high, or even go to 1440p. But anything over 60 with this game is really great, and extreme settings look awesome. In my time testing out the 4070, been really enjoying the performance it's putting out. Glad that we don't have that proprietary connector. Of course, the ASUS TUF version is a bit bigger than some of the others on the market, but it's going to keep it nice and cool, and we've got that extra cooling headroom for a little extra overclocking. If you wanted to go in and manually overclock this, I'm sure we could get a little more out of it. If you're looking for an extreme ray tracing card, I wouldn't go with the 4070. Of course, the best one on the market is going to be the 4090, but it definitely costs a grip. So I would stay away from the 4070 if you're really into ray tracing. But as you saw in this video, a lot of the stuff is totally possible on this card at 4K with no DLSS. Some of the newer stuff will need to be dropped down to 1440p, or if you don't mind using DLSS, it'll basically run everything at 4K. Really impressed with the performance. Now, again, these 40 series cards aren't cheap at all, and I completely understand that, but if you're putting the money into your PC and you want some good performance, then the 4070 might be a good option. Older cards can be picked up for a lot cheaper, either refurbished or used on eBay, so if you're looking to put together a budget build that'll get you by at 1080p and 1440, there are other options out there. 3070 comes to mind for 1440, 3060 if you're looking for some really good 1080p gaming, and you can pick those up pretty cheap used right now. The RTX 4070 really isn't for budget builds, but if you've got the money and you're looking to get some really great performance, then you might want to go with the 40 series. But in the end, it's really up to you. Now, if you've got any questions or you want to see anything else tested with the 4070, like a different operating system, we could go with Linux or something like that, let me know in the comments below. And I would like to give Newegg a big shout out for sending this over for a review, because I wouldn't have been able to pick it up without them. Links for this card over on Newegg's site will be in the description, and don't forget they sell everything else you need to get your PC up and running. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Like always, thanks for watching.